This is United States history from 10,000 BCE to 1877 AD. Hang on tight, it's going to be a fast ride. It was thought that the first people in North America arrived by the land bridge or boat. It's debated. Regardless of how they got here, there are 574 native tribes recognized today. Natives left behind earthworks, such as this mound in Louisiana that is 11,000 years old. Things began to change when Christopher Columbus went on a voyage to India, but landed in North America. He started the era of North American colonization. European nations wanted to get rich by colonizing the empty lands that were already filled with natives. Many people thought they needed a fresh start. Slave ships from Africa were filled with humans who were forced to work and brought over 200 years of slavery to North America. The British settled the colony of Roanoke in 1587. The people who settled here had no idea what would happen. A year later, the colony went missing with the only clue on a tree, the word Croatoan, marked on a tree. Other colonies were successful, such as the Plymouth colony, named after Plymouth Rock. They wrote the Mayflower Compact, the first European government created. The British would eventually establish the 13 colonies. They were settled for various reasons. Some people were escaping religious persecution while others wanted to make money. Some colonists in Virginia were upset since there was violence with Native Americans and the government did not do anything about it. Bacon attacked natives with his group and later burned down Jamestown, Virginia, to attempt to destroy the government. An issue was unfolding. Both the British and French claimed the Ohio River Valley. They both went out to establish forts to establish their presence. French built Fort Duquesne where the Ohio River begins, and the British built Fort Necessity in the middle of nowhere. George Washington was sent by the British to negotiate a truce with the French. They met at a glen. Someone shot their gun. It is not sure who shot first, but a Frenchman was shot and the French wanted vengeance. This marked the beginning of the French and Indian War. Various battles were fought in North America and around the world with the war ending in Canada. The British won the war and kicked the French out of the Ohio River Valley. The British had massive debt for the war, so something had to give in order to pay for it. Some of the things the British taxed were tea, sugar, and official documents that would have required a stamp. Due to the amount of protests, the British only left one tax, tea. Various people dressed as natives dumped tea into Boston Harbor as a form of protest. The British punished Boston by ending its local government and closing the port of Boston. Preparing for the worst, some citizens, later called Minutemen, had stockpiled weapons and prepared for an armed conflict. British troops went to Lexington, Massachusetts to seize weapons, and that's when open war began.
The British are coming, the British are coming.
George Washington launched a surprise attack in Trenton after crossing the frozen Delaware. Lord Dunmore issued a proclamation promising freedom to patriot slaves who joined the British Army. The next year, delegates met in Philadelphia and approved of the Declaration of Independence. The war went on for 8 long years and occurred mostly along the East Coast. Even a battle across from Missouri on the Mississippi River. After the British lost the Battle of Saratoga, the French decided to enact revenge against the British by joining the Patriots. With the help of the French, the United States won its independence in 1781. We finally broke free and we had an Articles of Confederation to solve all of our problems. Unfortunately, the Article of Confederation created a weak national government and powerful states. The states were on their own and did not work together. One of the biggest issues was the federal government had no power to tax, rather they begged the states for money who often refused. Due to the poor economy, farmers were losing their farms, and some in Massachusetts decided they would rebel. Daniel Shays led a force to prevent judges from going to court. An explosion of hostilities led to brief fighting. This showed the weakness of the government. People from each of the 13 states met again in Philadelphia to talk about how to fix the government. They decided to rewrite our governing document. During the hot summer months, the delegates met in secret to discuss what this new government should look like. Some states, like Virginia, thought that states with more people, like them, should have more votes in Congress. Small states, like New Jersey, thought their voices would be silenced and thought votes should be equal. Saving the convention, Connecticut came up with a plan of representation based off 2 per state and population. They also decided that 3 out of 5 slaves would be counted in representation. This was called the 3/5 Compromise and legalized slavery in the Constitution. It was also decided that a Bill of Rights was needed to protect our rights. There you have it, a constitution that could be changed as needed. Our first president was none other than George Washington. Washington oversaw the establishment of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and set precedents as president. Some Massachusetts farmers rebelled against a whiskey tax, claiming, "No taxation without representation." Washington put down the rebellion, telling the farmers to not test the government. Washington oversaw a war against natives in Ohio called the Northwest Indian War. They were forced west. After serving for 8 years, he finally was able to retire, where he only lived for 3 more years. He lived for 67 years. John Adams would be the second president. France wanted our help in their war, but Adams did not want to participate. The French attacked our ships. Adams and Jefferson faced each other in the election of 1800. It was a tie, and Jefferson was chosen as the victor. Since Jefferson was into smaller government, his election was seen as a revolution. A few people were sent to France to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans for up to $10 million. The French counter-offered with the offer of the entire Louisiana territory. This was shocking. Just like that, the nation doubled in size. Lewis and Clark would be chosen by Jefferson to explore the land and see if the Missouri River went to the Pacific Ocean. While they discovered that the Missouri River did not go to the Pacific Ocean, they did discover other things. A native named Tecumseh had a vision of taking over the United States back for natives. The British were also causing issues with this, such as taking ships. Thus, the War of 1812 was declared against the British and Native Americans. The British at one point set fire to Washington, D.C. At the Battle of Thames, Tecumseh was killed, thus ending the Native American resistance. At the Battle of Fort McHenry, the Star-Spangled Banner was written. The Treaty of Ghent kept things as they were, except the natives were forced further west. A final battle occurred in New Orleans as the British tried one last time to take something from us. The United States won, and Andrew Jackson was seen as a hero. President James Monroe ushered in an era of good feelings, since few people opposed him. The era was so good that he even issued a threat to Europe, saying, "Stay away from Central and South America." Imagine being so different that they name an era after you. He waged a war against the National Bank, gave positions to his friends, and fought South Carolina on a tariff. The Indian Removal Act was also signed that forced Cherokee out of Georgia. Natives were still forced west in a route called the Trail of Tears. Jackson was hated so much a political party, the Whig Party, was created to spite him. President Harrison ended the Jacksonian era. Joseph Smith was said to have had a vision and wrote the Book of Mormon. Smith got arrested in Illinois and lynched by a mob. The rest of the church members moved to the Great Salt Lake. In the early 1800s, various trails were developed to help settlers move west. One of the first was the Boone's Lick in Missouri to get to Salt Springs. The Oregon, California, and Santa Fe Trail began in Independence, Missouri. People on the Santa Fe Trail wanted to trade supplies from New Mexico. Families on the trail endured many struggles on their journey west. From St. Joseph, Missouri, the Pony Express brought mail to Sacramento, California, in 10 days. Young men were often the ones who worked on this route. In 1848, women met in Seneca Falls, New York for a convention to discuss women's rights. Women such as Angelina Grimke spoke out against slavery and advocated for women's rights. Missouri had wanted to become a state, but the issue was if they would be a slave or free state. The issue was if the northern or southern states would be more powerful. It was decided that Missouri was a slave state and Maine was a free state. A line was drawn for future states added. The invention of the cotton gin allowed for slavery to grow in popularity. The growth of abolitionism, the belief that slavery should end, began to speak out. One famous abolitionist was Frederick Douglass, a slave who ran away and wrote a book about his experiences. Harriet Tubman was a slave who ran away from Maryland and returned 13 times to help over 70 friends and family escape to freedom. United States settlers were moving into Texas, which was then owned by Mexico, and sought to secede from Mexico. At the Alamo, Texans were killed and the others wanted revenge on the Mexicans.
Remember the Alamo.
At San Jacinto, Texas finally gained their independence. Once Texas became a state, there was disagreement over who owned the Nueces Strip. It was no secret that James Polk wanted to take more land out west. The United States won the war after the Battle of Mexico City and won its desired land. The question of slavery remained, and Congress did not know what to do since they couldn't accept the Missouri Compromise. In 1850, a five-part compromise introduced the idea of popular sovereignty, letting states choose if they are free or slave. This concept was applied to Kansas and Nebraska through the Kansas-Nebraska Act. John Brown fought pro-slavery people in Kansas, wanting to make Kansas a free state. At Lawrence, pro-slavery people burned down the Free State Hotel. At Pottawatomie Creek, John Brown hacked 5 slave owners to death. At Marais des Cygnes, 5 anti-slavery people were killed, bringing the total dead in Bleeding, Kansas to 55. Kansas would be added as a free state in 1861. Various slave revolts occurred such as Nat Turner's Rebellion, where 60 people were killed in 2 days. Enslaved Turner would be executed. John Brown traveled to Maryland to prepare for an armed rebellion to end slavery. However, when he started his rebellion, he was trapped with some hostages in the engine house in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. John Brown would be executed and buried in New York. Dred Scott was a slave who sued for his freedom along with his wife since they lived in a free territory for a short time. The Supreme Court not only said that Scott was not free, but Congress could not control slavery. 4 contestants faced off in the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln was declared the winner and the South felt threatened by his presence. South Carolina left the United States in December of 1860. Soon, many other states would soon join them. The Confederate States of America was established with the capital in Richmond, Virginia, with Jefferson Davis as president. Abraham Lincoln refused to accept the departure of the Confederacy. Missouri's governor tried to get Missouri into the Confederacy. The General Assembly said no, they wanted to stay in the Union. Instead, he invaded his own state. Western Virginia decided to split from Virginia so they would not be in the Confederacy. On the morning of April 12, 1861, Confederates fired at Fort Sumter in South Carolina and captured it the next day. The Civil War has now begun. Originally, there were too many volunteers who wanted to fight, so they were turned away. At first Manassas, Confederates won, telling the Union that this would not be a quick war. At Wilson's Creek, Missouri, Confederates win the first major battle west of the Mississippi River, but later have to leave the area. Lincoln had a plan to change the war, but needed a victory first. Confederate General Robert E. Lee decided to invade the North after the victory at Second Manassas. At Antietam, Union won the day battle, but there were 3,650 deaths, making it the deadliest day in U.S. history. Lincoln did get his victory. Lincoln releases the Emancipation Proclamation, which frees the slaves in states in active rebellion. Robert E. Lee tried another northern invasion at Gettysburg. The battle lasted for 3 days, with the last day being a disaster due to Pickett's charge. This marks one of the pivotal moments of the war. Union General Ulysses Grant begins to lay siege on Vicksburg. It went on for 47 days and ended with the Union winning on July 4, 1863. The Mississippi River was won. Lincoln dedicated the Gettysburg Cemetery later that year, giving his famous Gettysburg Address. Union General Sherman felt that war needed to be destructive to end it faster. On his way to Atlanta, he was set back at Kennesaw Mountain but was able to regroup and go to Atlanta. Atlanta was completely destroyed, so they could not recover. Instead of engaging in typical battles to Savannah, Sherman destroyed the countryside to get the Georgians to abandon the Confederacy. After arriving to Savannah, the city was abandoned, so Sherman gave the city to Lincoln as his Christmas gift. General Grant began a 292-day siege at Petersburg so he could get the Confederate capital of Richmond. Grant was successful and captured Richmond in April of 1865. Due to the lack of supplies and troops, Lee had to finally give up and surrender. The terms of surrender were fairly generous, and the war ended at Appomattox Courthouse. 5 days after Appomattox Courthouse, Lincoln attends a play at Ford's Theater. Confederate supporter John Wilkes Booth shoots Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Lincoln dies the next morning at the Peterson House across the road. The memory of Lincoln would last forever. Vice President Andrew Johnson served the rest of Lincoln's term and was very forgiving to the South. The 13th Amendment brought the practice of slavery to an end. Ulysses Grant was president and sought to give rights to newly freed slaves. The controversial election of Rutherford Hayes marked an end to Reconstruction once all federal troops were pulled out of the South. Many more things happened, but that's a story for another time. Major figures from this time have large monuments. However, it was forgotten voices such as the enslaved that had built this nation.